Cascade Range stretched endlessly beyond the reinforced glass windows of the Sterling Pack House, their snow-capped peaks glowing amber in the October dawn. Cassandra Morgan stood at those windows every morning at 5:30, watching the mountains emerge from darkness like ancient sentinels guarding secrets they would never tell. She had watched those mountains for 5 years. 5 years of waking before the pack stirred. 5 years of managing a household that sprawled across 47,000 square feet of Montana wilderness. 5 years of being the perfect Luna to an imperfect situation. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. 24 years old, though the weight she carried made her feel decades older. Dark hair pulled into the same efficient bun she wore every day. Eyes that had learned to hide disappointment behind practiced composure. She looked like a queen. She felt like a fraud. Behind her, the master bedroom still held the warmth of Thaddeus Blackwood's body, the alpha king who had chosen her when she was barely 19. Their bed was a massive thing of carved timber and furs positioned to face those same mountains. He was still there now, one arm thrown across the space where she should have been, his chest rising and falling with the deep rhythm of a man who could still find peace in sleep. She envied him that. Peace had become a stranger to Cassandra Morgan. The pack house woke in stages. First, the Omegas moving through the lower floors like ghosts lighting fires and preparing breakfast for 600 members who lived within these walls or in the surrounding cabins that dotted the property for 12 miles in every direction. Then the Gammas, the warriors who ran perimeter patrols and checked security systems that monitored a territory stretching from the Canadian border down through Idaho and into northern Wyoming. Finally, the Betas, the administrators who made the Western Territories coalition function like the small nation it essentially was. Cassandra knew every rhythm of this place. She had learned them all in those first terrifying months after Thaddeus had claimed her as his true mate, when the moon goddess herself had confirmed their bond in a ceremony that left both of them marked with silver scars along their wrists. The pack had celebrated for 3 days. Elder Tobias Wren had smiled with teeth that never reached his eyes and told her she had a sacred duty to fulfill. She had been too young and too in love to understand what he meant. She understood now. The first Omega she encountered was Maria, a woman in her 50s who had served the pack house since before Cassandra was born. Maria's eyes always held a particular kind of sadness when they met Cassandra's, a pity that cut deeper than any insult. "Good morning, Luna," Maria whispered as they passed in the hallway leading to the great kitchens. "The breakfast preparations are ahead of schedule." "Thank you, Maria." Cassandra's voice never wavered. She had learned that trick in year 2. Never let them hear the cracks. The kitchen was a cathedral of steel and stone built to feed an army because that was essentially what the pack was. Industrial ovens lined one wall. Prep stations stretched across the center like an assembly line. 3 Omegas worked in synchronized silence, their hands moving through tasks they had performed thousands of times. They looked up when Cassandra entered, then quickly looked away. Always the looking away. She reviewed the menu for the Winter Solstice Gala, an annual tradition that drew alphas and their entourages from every pack in the coalition. 600 confirmed guests. Dinner for 800 to account for +1s in security details. Locally sourced venison, wild salmon flown in from Alaska, vegetables from the pack's own greenhouses, wine from California, whiskey from Kentucky, champagne from France. Nothing but the best for the Western Territories. The event was 6 weeks away. 6 weeks until the deadline that nobody spoke about, but everyone knew. 6 weeks until the Council of Elders would invoke the succession clause if Cassandra had not produced an heir. Her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. Flat, empty, barren. 61 pregnancy tests over 5 years. 61 times she had waited with hope that died a little more with each negative result. 61 times she had faced Thaddeus and watched something flicker behind his eyes. Not disappointment exactly. Something worse. Resignation. Dr. Helena Monroe, the pack physician, had run every test known to modern medicine and several known only to werewolf healers. "Physically, there is nothing wrong with you," Helena had told her after the 47th negative test. "Sometimes true mates take longer. The moon goddess has her own timeline." But the moon goddess was not answerable to the Council of Elders, and Elder Tobias Wren had made it abundantly clear that his patience had expired. Cassandra finished reviewing the menu and moved to her next task. The pack school needed new textbooks for the advanced mathematics program. The hospital wing required updated imaging equipment. 3 families had requested assistance with mortgage payments after the sawmill closure in the Northern Territory. Every decision crossed her desk. Every problem became hers to solve. She had built systems and processes that ran smoother than anything the pack had seen in 2 generations. She had negotiated treaties with neighboring packs that had expanded their trading networks into Oregon and Washington. She had personally overseen the construction of a community center that served as a gathering place for pack members who lived in the outlying regions. She had done everything a Luna could do except the one thing that mattered. The morning bled into afternoon. Cassandra moved through the pack house like a conductor leading an orchestra, each gesture precise, each word calibrated. She met with the head of security to review patrol schedules. She approved budget allocations for the upcoming quarter. She listened to an Omega mother express concerns about bullying in the elementary school and promised to address it personally. She smiled, she nodded. She performed her role with the dedication of someone who knew the stage was rotting beneath her feet. At 2 in the afternoon, she had her monthly appointment with Dr. Monroe. The medical wing occupied the entire east side of the pack house, a testament to Thaddeus's belief that his people deserve the best health care available. Examination rooms lined a hallway that smelled of antiseptic and the particular sweetness of healing herbs that werewolf medicine still employed alongside modern treatments. Helena's office was at the end of that hallway, a space filled with medical journals and photographs of the hundreds of pack babies she had delivered over her 40-year career. Cassandra sat on the examination table, her feet dangling above the floor, and waited while Helena prepared the pregnancy test. The routine never changed. Blood draw, urine sample, transvaginal ultrasound to check for any abnormalities. Helena worked in efficient silence, her hands gentle, despite the clinical nature of the examination. 15 minutes later, Helena pulled off her gloves and sat on her rolling stool, her expression carefully neutral. "Negative," she said quietly. "I am sorry, Cassandra." 62. "The council meets next week," Cassandra heard herself say. "Elder Wren has requested that you present a formal report on my fertility status." Helena's jaw tightened. "I will tell them what I have told them every month for the past year. You are healthy. You are capable of conception. True mate bonds sometimes require patience that political bodies do not possess." "Thank you, Helena." "Cassandra." The doctor's voice stopped her at the door. "I delivered you when your mother died in childbirth. I have watched you grow into a woman of remarkable strength. What the council is doing to you is unconscionable." But unconscionable did not mean impossible, and strength could not produce a baby from a womb that refused to quicken. Cassandra walked the hallways back to the central wing, passing pack members who nodded respectfully and then whispered as soon as they thought she was out of earshot. She had learned to hear those whispers even when they dropped to subsonic levels. Werewolf hearing was both blessing and curse. 5 years and nothing. "My cousin got pregnant on her first heat after mating. Elder Wren says it is an insult to the moon goddess. I heard the king is losing patience." She climbed the grand staircase to the second floor where the administrative offices and council chambers occupied rooms that had once served as ballrooms and galleries. The council chamber doors were closed, but she could hear voices inside. Raised voices. Thaddeus's distinctive baritone cutting through Elder Wren's raspy tenor. "I will not hear another word about replacing my mate. She is Luna by divine right, confirmed by the moon goddess herself. And the moon goddess has not seen fit to bless that union with offspring." Elder Wren's voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "The succession clause exists for precisely this situation, Alpha King. A ruler without an heir is a powder keg waiting for a match. Every alpha in the coalition is watching, waiting. Some are already having quiet conversations about who might be better suited to lead. But let them talk. I chose Cassandra. That choice stands." "For how long?" Another voice joined the argument. Councilman Davies, who had 3 daughters and had been angling for years to marry one of them into the royal line. "The winter solstice is 6 weeks away. If your Luna has not conceived by then, the council has the authority to call a vote of no confidence. We have been more than patient, Thaddeus. We have given you 5 years." A long silence followed. Cassandra stood frozen in the hallway, her hand gripping the banister so tightly the wood creaked. "What exactly are you proposing?" Thaddeus's voice had gone cold. "Dangerous. We are not proposing anything." Elder Wren again, smooth as poisoned honey. "We are simply reminding you that the law is clear. An Alpha King must secure the succession. If his mate cannot provide that security, alternative arrangements must be made." Alternative arrangements. There are precedents, historical examples of alphas, who took secondary mates for breeding purposes while maintaining their true bond. It is not ideal, but it preserves the integrity of the pack while honoring the mate bond. You could keep your Luna in every way that matters, Thaddeus. She would simply share the burden of public duties with someone more capable. Cassandra did not remember walking away. She found herself in the gardens gulping air that tasted of pine and coming snow. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to shed where anyone might see. The gardens were her creation, built over 3 years from a wild tangle into something approaching beauty. Stone pathways wound between beds of mountain flowers that bloom purple and gold even this late in the season. A fountain carved from local granite burbled at the center, surrounded by benches where pack members could sit and find peace. She found no peace. Footsteps on gravel announced a visitor. She did not need to turn around to know who it was. Callahan Rivers had a particular way of walking, a measured tread that spoke of military training and predator patience. You heard. It was not a question. Cal had been Thaddeus's beta for 8 years, his second-in-command and oldest friend. He had also been Cassandra's ally since the day she arrived at the pack house, a terrified 19-year-old who had just lost both parents and found herself mated to a king. I heard, she confirmed. Cal sat on the bench beside her, his presence solid and comforting in a way that made her throat tighten. He was 30 years old, built like the warrior he was, with scars that mapped a lifetime of protecting the pack. His eyes, when they met hers, held genuine anger. It is unconscionable, he said, echoing Helena's earlier words. It is politics. Cassandra's voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. The pack needs an heir. I have failed to provide one. Elder Wren is simply doing what he believes is necessary. Elder Wren is a classist snake who has never believed you were good enough for Thaddeus because your parents were betas from a minor pack in Idaho. Cal's bluntness was one of the things she appreciated most about him. He has been undermining you since the day you arrived. This is not about the good of the pack cast. This is about power and control. Then he is winning. Not yet. Cal leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed on the fountain. Thaddeus will not allow this. He loves you. Everyone who has eyes can see it. Love. Such a small word for something that had defined her entire adult life. She loved Thaddeus Blackwood with an intensity that sometimes frightened her. When they were alone, when the pressures of leadership and succession fell away, she could feel the mate bond between them, like a living thing, warm and golden and unbreakable. He touched her with reverence. He listened when she spoke. He had given her authority over domains that previous Lunas had never been allowed to control. But love could not produce a baby, and in the world they inhabited, that made it insufficient. I should get back, she said, standing. The gala preparations will not manage themselves. Cal caught her wrist as she passed his grip, gentle but insistent. If you need anything, Cass, if you need someone to talk to or someone to help you or someone to commit treason with. He smiled faintly at that last part. I am here. She squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the lump in her throat, and walked back toward the pack house. The rest of the afternoon dissolved into the same blur of tasks and responsibilities that filled every day. She approved the final guest list for the gala. She reviewed architectural plans for expanding the Northern Territory school system. She mediated a dispute between two families over grazing rights. She performed her duties with mechanical precision, while her mind replayed Elder Wren's words in an endless loop. Alternative arrangements, someone more capable. Share the burden of public duties. Dinner that night was a formal affair in the main dining hall, a cavernous space that could seat 200 people beneath rafters hung with antler chandeliers. The head table sat on a raised dais positioned so the Alpha King and his Luna could oversee the assembled pack. Cassandra wore a deep green dress that Thaddeus had given her for their 3rd anniversary, her hair twisted into an elegant updo that had taken Maria 40 minutes to perfect. She looked the part. She always looked the part. Thaddeus sat beside her, resplendent in black, his presence commanding even in stillness. He was 32 years old and looked carved from the same granite as the mountains that surrounded them. Dark hair touched with silver at the temples, steel gray eyes that could freeze enemies in their tracks, or warm with affection when he looked at her. A scar along his jaw from a border dispute when he was 25. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are. He had not mentioned the council meeting. Neither had she. They ate venison and roasted vegetables while the pack filled the hall with a conversation and laughter. Werewolves were tactile creatures by nature, and the dining hall was a chaos of touch. Mates leaned into each other. Parents corralled enthusiastic children. Friends clasped shoulders and shared jokes. Life and warmth and connection everywhere she looked, except at the head table where an invisible wall had risen between her and her mate. After dinner, Thaddeus took her hand and led her back to their chambers through hallways that echoed with their footsteps. The master suite occupied the entire top floor of the central tower, a space designed for privacy and security. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered 360-degree views of the territory. A fireplace large enough to stand in provided heat that the modern heating system supplemented. Their bed dominated the room, that massive construction of wood and furs that had seen 5 years of lovemaking and quiet conversations and increasingly careful distance. Thaddeus poured himself a whiskey from the bar cart and stood at the windows, his back to her. Cassandra began the nightly ritual of removing her jewelry, each piece carefully returned to its designated box. Diamond earrings, pearl necklace, the Luna's ring, a band of white gold set with the moonstone that caught light like captured starshine. "I spoke with Elder Wren today," Thaddeus said finally. His voice was carefully controlled, which meant he was furious. He presented the council's concerns about the succession. "I heard," Cassandra admitted. "No point in lying. I was in the hallway." He turned to face her, and the anguish in his eyes made her chest tighten. "I will not let them do this to you, Cass. I will not let them take away your title, or your dignity, or your place at my side. And if they invoke the succession clause, then I will fight it. I am still Alpha King. My word still carries weight." For how long? She hated how small her voice sounded. How long before they start questioning your fitness to lead? How long before other alphas sense weakness and begin making moves? "We both know how this works, Thad. A king without an heir is a king on borrowed time." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, his face buried in her hair, his breath warm against her temple. The mate bond flared between them, that unbreakable tether that the moon goddess herself had forged. She could feel his heartbeat against her cheek, could smell his scent of pine and petrichor, could sense the turmoil roiling beneath his alpha composure. "We have time," he whispered. "We will figure this out together, I swear to you, Cass. I swear on my life that I will not let them break us." She wanted to believe him. She wrapped her arms around his waist and held on like he was the only solid thing in a world that had started to tilt. They stood like that for long minutes while the fire crackled and the mountains stood witness beyond the windows. Later they made love with a desperation that spoke of endings neither wanted to acknowledge. His hands on her skin, her nails in his back. The ancient dance of mates seeking comfort and connection in the only way that had never failed them. Afterwards, she lay in his arms and listened to his breathing slow and deepen as sleep claimed him. She did not sleep. She stared at the ceiling and counted the weeks until winter solstice and wondered what alternative arrangements would look like in practice. She got her answer on a Tuesday morning in late October. The pack was in full preparation mode for the gala. Florists had arrived from Seattle to transform the Great Hall into a winter wonderland. Caterers were conducting final menu tastings. The security team was running background checks on every confirmed guest and their entourages. Cassandra was in the main administrative office, reviewing the seating chart for the 8th time, when the heavy oak doors at the front of the pack house opened with a boom that echoed through the entire structure. She felt it before she saw it. A disturbance in the pack bonds a ripple of shock and confusion that spread through the connected consciousness of 600 werewolves like a stone dropped in still water. Her head snapped up, papers forgotten, every instinct screaming that something fundamental had just shifted. Thaddeus walked through those doors. She knew his footsteps could have identified them, blind and deaf, but he was not alone. The woman trailing slightly behind him was striking in a way that made Cassandra's breath catch. Platinum blonde hair that fell to her waist in perfect waves. Ice blue eyes set in a face that belonged on magazine covers. Tall and slender and effortlessly beautiful in a way that required no effort because genetics had done all the work. But it was not her appearance that made the air in Cassandra's lungs turn to ash. It was her scent. She smelled of Thaddeus. Not the casual scent transfer that happened when people stood in proximity. She smelled claimed, marked. She smelled like she had spent significant time pressed against his skin, absorbing his essence until it became part of her own olfactory signature. Sweet vanilla layered over his pine, wild orchids tangled with his petrichor, the scent of intimacy, the scent of possession. Cassandra stood frozen at the head of the conference table, surrounded by 30 pack members who had been helping with gala preparations. The pen slipped from her fingers and clattered against the polished wood, impossibly loud in the sudden, suffocating silence. Thaddeus's jaw was tight, his posture rigid as his eyes found hers across the room. He did not offer a smile. He did not rush to her side as he usually did when entering a space where she waited. Instead, he placed a protective hand on the small of the woman's back, a gesture of claim and care that drove splinters into Cassandra's heart. "Cassandra." His voice echoed in the silence, formal and cold, and nothing like the warmth she knew. "We need to talk, in my study, now." She followed them through hallways that had become unfamiliar, her legs moving on pure muscle memory, while her mind screamed. The woman walked between them, her head held high, her movements graceful and confident. Pack members pressed themselves against walls as they passed their eyes wide with shock and speculation. News would spread through the pack at the speed of thought. By dinner, everyone would know. The Alpha King had brought another woman home. Thaddeus's study was a sanctuary of dark wood and leather lined with books and maps and the accumulated history of the Western territories. A fire burned in the hearth despite the October chill being minimal. When the heavy door clicked shut behind them, sealing the three of them in artificial intimacy, Cassandra felt the first crack appear in the composure she had maintained for 5 years. The woman turned slowly, letting her coat fall open with deliberate casualness. The unmistakable swell of a second trimester pregnancy pushed against the fabric of her silk dress. At least 5 months, probably closer to 6 based on the size. Far enough along that the risk of miscarriage had passed. Far enough along that the pack would know this was real. "What is this?" The words came out as a whisper, Cassandra's voice threatening to break entirely. The mate bond that usually felt like a warm tether in her chest suddenly felt like a chain pulled taut, every link cutting into something vital. Thaddeus ran his hand through his dark hair, a nervous gesture she knew too well. "Cassandra, this is Serafina Vale. She is the daughter of Alpha Marcus Vale from the Oregon Territories." He paused, and Cassandra watched something that might have been shame flicker behind his eyes. "She is carrying my child." The words dropped like anvils into the space between them. Cassandra could not breathe, could not think, could not process what she was hearing because it was impossible. Impossible because he was her true mate. Impossible because they were bound by divine decree. Impossible because he had promised her over and over again during 5 years of negative pregnancy tests that they would face this together. Her wolf howled in her mind, throwing herself against mental barriers with enough force to make Cassandra sway on her feet. Mate, traitor, betrayal. The wolf's rage was incandescent, demanding blood and justice and retribution. How? The single word scraped out of her throat like broken glass. The summer summit. Thaddeus would not meet her eyes. It was in May. Elder Wren and the council had just issued another ultimatum about the succession. I was stressed, overwhelmed. I made a mistake, Cassandra, one night, just one night, but she is carrying the next alpha of the Western Territories. 5 months ago, while she had been at home managing his territory and sleeping in his bed and loving him with everything she possessed, he had been sleeping with another woman. And that woman was now 5 months pregnant with his child, while Cassandra remained barren. The irony was a blade twisting in her gut. Serafina stepped forward, one perfectly manicured hand resting delicately on her swollen stomach. When she spoke, her voice was cultured and cold, each word precisely calculated. "It is nothing personal, Cassandra. You simply could not fulfill your duties to the king. I can." Cassandra looked at Thaddeus, waiting for him to defend her. Waiting for him to reprimand this woman who dared to speak to the Luna of the Western Territories with such casual disrespect. Waiting for the man she loved to remember that she was his mate, chosen by the moon goddess herself. He remained silent, staring at the floor like a coward. That silence broke something in Cassandra faster than any words could have. "The council has made a decision." Thaddeus's voice had gone flat mechanical, like he was reading from a script someone else had written. "Serafina will take the title of Luna. The pack needs to see their future secured with a confirmed heir. The Winter Solstice Gala will serve as her official introduction to the coalition." 6 weeks. They could not even wait 6 weeks. "But you do not have to leave, Cassandra." He finally looked at her, and she wished he had not. The guilt in his eyes was genuine, which made it worse. "You are my true mate. That bond cannot be broken. You will stay in the East Wing. You will still be mine, just not in the public eye. The pack will understand. This is for the good of everyone." The sheer audacity of his proposition cut through her shock like a lightning strike. He wanted to keep her as a secret, a shameful thing hidden in the shadows, while another woman paraded around with her title, her husband, and the child that should have been hers. While Serafina hosted galas and negotiated treaties and accepted the respect that Cassandra had earned through 5 years of flawless service, he wanted her to be the mistress while his mistress became his wife. The mate bond did not break. You could not break a true bond without death. But in that moment, standing in Thaddeus Blackwood's study, with his pregnant mistress smiling like a cat with cream, Cassandra felt that bond mutate. It twisted from a lifeline into something diseased. A festering wound that would poison her slowly unless she cut it out herself. "You want me to be your mistress?" Her voice came out eerily calm, devoid of the hysterics they were both clearly bracing for. While your mistress becomes your wife, it is for the good of the pack, Cassandra. Thaddeus stepped toward her, reaching for her hand like he had any right to touch her. Please try to understand. I am trying to find a solution that honors our bond while securing the future. You can stay. You can still be part of my life. This does not have to destroy us. She flinched away from his touch violently, her wolf snarling so loudly in her mind that she was surprised they could not hear it. Don't touch me. The words came out low and dangerous. You are no longer my alpha, and I will never be your shadow. She did not wait for his response. She turned on her heel and walked out of the study, her spine straight, her head high, refusing to let them see her crumble. She walked through hallways lined with pack members who quickly looked away. She climbed the grand staircase to the second floor. She passed the administrative offices where she had spent countless hours building something meaningful. She made it to her bedroom before her legs gave out. The master suite felt like a mausoleum. Every surface mocked her with memories. The bed where he had held her last night. The windows where they had watched sunrises together. The fireplace where they had talked about their future back when she still believed they had one. She collapsed on the bathroom floor, her vision blurring with tears she could no longer contain. The pain of the betrayal was physical. A tearing sensation in her chest where the mate bond writhed like something dying. She dry heaved over the toilet, her entire body shaking with the force of grief and rage and heartbreak. 5 years. 5 years of loving him and serving his pack and believing that their bond meant something sacred. He had thrown her away for a politically convenient pregnancy. Cassandra knelt on the cold marble and let herself break. She cried until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen and she had no tears left to shed. She cried for the girl she had been at 19, so in love and so naive. She cried for the woman she had become, competent and strong, and ultimately worthless because she could not produce an heir. She cried for the future she had envisioned, children with Thaddeus's eyes, and her determination, a family built on love and divine blessing. She cried for something else too, something that was just beginning to take shape in her mind as the shock wore off and reality set in. She could not stay here. The knowledge came with crystalline clarity. Thaddeus said she did not have to leave, but that was a lie born of guilt and political calculation. The East Wing was not a generous offer. It was a prison, a place where she would be forced to watch Serafina raise the child that cemented her claim to everything Cassandra had built, where she would hear the pack whisper about the barren Luna relegated to the shadows, where she would slowly go insane from proximity to a mate who had betrayed her. She knew pack law. A Luna could not simply walk away from her alpha. The mate bond created obligations that superseded personal desire. If she tried to walk out the front door, the guards would stop her before she reached the driveway. Elder Wren would invoke some obscure pack law that gave the council authority to detain her for her own protection. She would be locked in the East Wing, a prisoner to her own broken heart, watching the life she should have lived play out with another woman in the starring role. If she was going to leave, she would have to run, and she would have to do it tonight. Running from a werewolf pack was essentially signing your own death warrant. Wolves were apex predators designed by nature to track and hunt and capture. Their sense of smell could follow a trail days old. Their hearing could detect a heartbeat from 100 yards. Their pack bonds created a network of consciousness that made hiding nearly impossible. To escape the Western Territories, Cassandra would have to become something other than what she was. She would have to become invisible. The plan formed in pieces as she moved through the master suite with mechanical precision. First, a duffel bag from the closet. Not the expensive luggage Thaddeus had bought her for their second anniversary, something ordinary that would not attract attention. She packed quickly, jeans and sweaters, practical clothes that could withstand hard travel. Undergarments, a single photograph of her parents taken a week before they died. Her mother's silver locket, the only inheritance she possessed. The safe hidden behind a painting of the Cascade Mountains held $52,000 in cash. Money she had saved over 5 years from the stipend Thaddeus provided for personal expenses. Money she had told herself was for emergencies. She had never imagined an emergency like this. She stuffed it into the bottom of the duffel, wrapped in a towel to muffle any sound it might make. Then came the dangerous part. The pack house apothecary occupied the basement level, a climate-controlled space where the pack's healer stored herbs and tinctures and the specialized medicines that werewolf physiology sometimes required. Cassandra had been down there countless times, helping to inventory supplies and learn about traditional remedies. She knew where everything was kept, including the wolf's bane, aconitum lycoctonum, monk's hood, devil's helmet. It had a dozen names and one consistent quality: it was lethally toxic to werewolves. Ingesting even a small amount could cause paralysis, organ failure, and death within hours. But consumed in carefully measured doses, brewed into a tea, and taken daily, it did something else entirely. It suppressed a werewolf's scent. The human form that werewolves wore was real, not an illusion. But it carried markers that others of their kind could detect. Pheromones that signaled pack affiliation, rank, gender, fertility status. A complex olfactory signature that was as unique as a fingerprint and just as identifiable. Wolf's bane in sublethal doses scrambled those signals. It made a werewolf smell completely, utterly human. It would also make her violently ill. Constant nausea, weakness, potential organ damage if used too long. But it would hide her from the trackers that Thaddeus would inevitably send. Cassandra moved through the darkened hallways like a ghost, avoiding the main routes where pack members might still be awake. The basement stairs were stone worn smooth by centuries of feet. The apothecary door was locked, but she had the master key that all senior pack members carried. Inside, the air smelled of dried sage and lavender and darker things. She found the wolf's bane in a locked cabinet marked with warning symbols. 6 mason jars of dried purple flowers and leaves. She took 4, leaving 2 so the theft would not be immediately obvious. Wrapped them in cloth to prevent breakage. Tucked them into her duffel bag next to the cash. When she emerged from the basement, her heart was hammering so hard she was sure the entire pack could hear it. But the hallways remained empty. Most pack members were in their own quarters or the common areas. No one paid attention to Aluna moving through her own home. Back in the master suite, she sat on the edge of the bed and waited. Thaddeus would come eventually. He always came to bed, even on nights when they fought. The mate bond would pull him here, would make separation physically uncomfortable. She had maybe 3 hours before that happened. Outside the window, storm clouds had begun to gather over the mountains. Cassandra watched them build massive thunderheads that promised the kind of Pacific Northwest deluge that could turn the forest into an impassable maze. The weather forecast had predicted heavy rain starting around midnight, continuing through the morning. 50-mile-per-hour winds. Zero visibility. Perfect. At 11:30, she changed into her running clothes. Moisture-wicking layers that would not weigh her down when they got wet. Hiking boots with good traction. A dark jacket with a hood. She plaited her hair into a tight braid. She stripped off her Luna's ring and left it on the nightstand, catching the firelight one last time. At 11:45, the first drops of rain hit the windows. At 11:50, she slung the duffel bag over her shoulder and opened the private door that led from the master suite to the servants' staircase. A route she knew would be empty because the Omegas had finished their duties hours ago. Maria stood at the bottom of the stairs. The older woman looked up as Cassandra descended, her eyes taking in the bag, the clothes, the obvious intent. For a long moment they stared at each other. Maria had served the pack house for 30 years. She had witnessed 3 different Lunas come and go. She knew things that others only suspected. Slowly, deliberately, Maria turned her back. Cassandra slipped past her and out the servants' entrance into a night that had turned savage with wind and rain. The forest behind the pack house was ancient and unforgiving. Douglas fir and western red cedar that had stood for centuries. Undergrowth thick enough to hide a dozen dangers. Terrain that rose and fell in sudden cliffs and hidden ravines. In good weather, it was challenging. In a storm like this, it was potentially deadly. Cassandra ran, not in her wolf form. Paws left distinctive tracks, and her white coat would be a beacon in the darkness. She ran on 2 legs, human and clumsy, stumbling over roots she could not see and crashing through branches that tore at her clothes. The rain was a solid wall of water soaking through her jacket in seconds, turning the ground to slick mud beneath her boots. The mate bond pulled at her chest like a physical hook, urging her to turn back. Every step away from Thaddeus felt like tearing off a piece of her own soul. The bond was not designed to be fought. It was meant to draw mates together, to create an unbreakable connection that sustained them both. Breaking away from it felt like dying slowly. She ran anyway. Through the darkness and the storm, in the agony of severance, Cassandra Morgan ran. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs shook, and she could no longer tell the difference between rain and tears on her face. She ran until the pack house lights disappeared behind her, and all that existed was the next step, the next breath, the next moment of choosing freedom over captivity. By dawn, she was 15 miles away, buying a ticket at a Greyhound station in Kalispell under the name Bellwoods. The bus smelled like diesel in desperation. Cassandra slumped in a seat at the back, her wet clothes steaming in the overheated interior, and watched Montana disappear through a grimy window. The mountains receded into the distance, those ancient sentinels that had witnessed her rise and fall, now standing judgment on her flight. She did not look back. The Pacific coast town of Timber Cove emerged from the fog like something half remembered from a dream. Population 2,800 according to the faded sign at the city limits. Cassandra stepped off the Greyhound at a depot that was little more than a bench and a shelter, her boots hitting cracked asphalt that glistened with perpetual moisture. The air tasted of salt and fish and diesel exhaust, a combination that made her stomach turn even before the wolfsbane had fully entered her system. She had been running for 6 days, 6 days of buses that stopped in every forgotten town between Montana and the Oregon coast. 6 days of truck stop bathrooms where she changed clothes and washed her face with industrial soap. 6 days of paying cash for everything, never using a name twice, never staying anywhere long enough to be remembered. The duffel bag felt like it weighed 100 pounds despite containing everything she owned in the world. Timber Cove looked like the end of something. Gray shingled houses clung to hillsides that dropped toward a harbor choked with fishing boats. Main Street consisted of 6 blocks of businesses that had seen better decades. A hardware store with windows displaying tools that predated the internet. A diner called the Rusted Anchor, its neon sign flickering in the afternoon gloom. A tackle shop. A post office. A combination gas station and convenience store where locals in rain gear moved with the slow efficiency of people who had nowhere urgent to be. It was perfect. Cassandra walked Main Street with her hood up and her head down looking for the one thing she needed most. She found it between the hardware store and a shuttered insurance office. A hand-lettered sign in a second-story window, studio apartment for rent, $700 per month, inquire below. The hardware store smelled of sawdust and machine oil. An older man stood behind the counter, reading a newspaper that looked 3 days old. He glanced up as the door chimed, his eyes cataloging her in the way that small-town people assessed strangers. Cassandra had learned to recognize that look. It meant either opportunity or suspicion, sometimes both. Help you, his voice was gravel and cigarettes weathered by decades of coastal winters. The apartment. Cassandra's voice came out rougher than she intended. 6 days of minimal conversation had made speech feel foreign. Is it still available? The man folded his newspaper with deliberate slowness. You running from something? The bluntness surprised her into honesty. Yes. He studied her for a long moment, taking in the duffel bag, the exhaustion she could not quite hide, the careful way she held herself like someone expecting violence. Then he nodded. $700 a month, first and last up front. I have to turn. No lease, no questions. Utilities included. I don't allow drugs, don't allow parties, don't allow anything that brings police to my door. Beyond that, I don't care what you do. That works. Cassandra pulled cash from her jacket pocket, counted out $1,400 bills. Her hands shook slightly as she passed them across the counter. The man noticed but said nothing. Name's Frank Dalton. I own the building. Studio's up the back stairs, faces the alley. Quiet. Private. He produced a key from beneath the counter. Old brass worn smooth from use. You need anything fixed, you let me know. Otherwise, we probably won't see much of each other. Thank you, Mr. Dalton. Frank. He returned to his newspaper, dismissing her with the same efficiency with which he had rented her the apartment. Welcome to Timber Cove. Try not to let it depress you too much. The studio was 300 square feet of water-stained walls and scratched hardwood floors. A kitchenette occupied one corner, its ancient appliances humming with the determination of machinery that refused to die. A bathroom barely large enough to turn around in, a single window that looked out over a dumpster in the alley beyond. A Murphy bed that folded down from the wall, its mattress thin enough that she could feel the metal frame beneath. It was the most beautiful thing Cassandra had ever seen. She set her duffel on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself to stop moving. Her entire body ached. Muscles she had not used in years protested the 6 days of hard travel. Her feet had blisters from boots that had never been designed for distance running. The mate bond in her chest felt like a wound that would not stop bleeding, a constant low-grade agony that she had learned to breathe through. But she was alive. She was free. And she was 300 miles from the Western Territories. That night, she brewed her first cup of wolfsbane tea. The wolfsbane ritual was precise. 1 teaspoon of dried flowers and leaves steeped in boiling water for exactly 7 minutes, strained through cheesecloth to remove particulates. The resulting liquid was the color of dark amber and smelled like death. Cassandra sat at the tiny kitchen table and stared at the cup, knowing that once she drank it, there was no going back. The first sip tasted like bitterness and desperation. The second went down easier. By the third, her throat had gone numb. The effects hit within an hour. Nausea rolled through her in waves, sending her stumbling to the bathroom where she vomited until there was nothing left. Her skin felt too tight, like something crawling beneath the surface. Her vision blurred at the edges. Her wolf whimpered in her mind, confused and frightened by the poison flooding their shared system. But when she finally emerged from the bathroom at 3 in the morning, shaking and pale and barely able to stand, she knew it had worked. Her scent had changed. The complex markers that identified her as werewolf, as Luna, as Cassandra Morgan of the Western Territories, had been scrambled. She smelled human. Utterly, completely human. It was the most horrifying and liberating thing she had ever experienced. The job came 3 days later, after she had recovered enough to walk without her legs shaking. The rusted anchor was always hiring because the work was hard and the pay was terrible, and most people did not last more than a few weeks. Cassandra walked in at 5 in the morning when the owner was prepping for the breakfast rush and asked if they needed a waitress. The woman behind the counter looked like she had been carved from the same coastal rock as the town itself. 60 years old, iron gray hair pulled into a bun, cigarette dangling from the corner of her mouth, despite the no-smoking laws that everyone ignored. Her name tag said Denise. "You done this before?" Denise did not look up from the industrial coffee mug she was wrestling into submission. "No, Sin." Cassandra had learned that lying required too much energy, but I learn fast and I show up on time. Most important qualification right there. Denise finally looked at her eyes sharp despite the early hour. "You running from something, second time in 3 days. Apparently small coastal towns only had one question for strangers." "Yes." "He hit you, thus?" "No, just broke my heart." Denise nodded like that made perfect sense. $11 an hour plus tips, 6 to 2, 5 days a week. You get 1 meal per shift, no substitutions. You steal from the register or show up drunk, you're fired. You think you can handle that? Yes. Let's start tomorrow. Wear black pants and comfortable shoes. The uniform shirts are in the back. I'll get you fitted. Denise paused, something almost gentle crossing her weathered features. "What's your name?" Cassandra hesitated. She had used Belle Woods on the bus ticket. She could not use Cassandra Morgan anywhere. She needed something that felt true enough to answer to, but false enough to hide behind. "Cass," she said finally. "Just Cass." "All right, just Cass. Welcome to the worst job you've ever had. You're gonna hate it." Denise was right. The work was brutal in ways that had nothing to do with physical labor. Cassandra had managed a pack house with 600 members, had negotiated treaties with neighboring alphas, had balanced budgets that ran into millions of dollars. But she had never stood on her feet for 8 hours straight, pouring coffee for fishermen who smelled like the ocean and construction workers who talked around her like she was furniture. Her wolf hated it. Every instinct screamed that she was a Luna, that these people should show her respect, that she was debasing herself by serving humans who did not even know she existed. But Cassandra welcomed the degradation. It was penance, it was anonymity, it was survival. The wolf's bane tea became her morning ritual. Every day at 5 a.m. before her shift, she brewed the poison and forced it down. Every day, her body protested with nausea and headaches in a bone-deep exhaustion that never quite faded. Her skin took on a pallor that Denise noticed but did not comment on. Her hands developed a tremor that made carrying full coffee pots an exercise in concentration. But her scent remained human, and that was all that mattered. 3 weeks into her new life, the burner phone rang. Cassandra stared at it for a full minute before answering, her heart hammering against her ribs. Only one person had the number. She had bought the phone specifically so Callahan Rivers could reach her in emergencies, back when she still believed she might need a lifeline to the world she had fled. She answered on the 6th ring. "Cal." "Cass," his voice crackled through the cheap speaker, rough with relief and anxiety in equal measure. "Thank the goddess. I have been calling for 2 days. I have been working." The lie came easily. She had been avoiding the phone, terrified of what news it might bring. "What is wrong?" "Everything." Cal's exhale was audible even through the static. "Cass, you need to hear this. Thaddeus is losing his mind." Her fingers tightened on the phone. She sat on the edge of her Murphy bed, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, and forced herself to ask the question. "What happened?" "When he realized you were actually gone, he snapped. Completely. He nearly killed Elder Wren, and a rage broke 3 of the old bastard's ribs and fractured his jaw. It took me and 4 gammas to pull him off. He has mobilized the elite trackers, Cass, all 12 of them. They are scouring the entire western seaboard from British Columbia to Northern California." The room felt too small suddenly, too bright. Cassandra stood and moved to the window, looking out at the gray morning and the fog that rolled in from the Pacific like a living thing. "He is looking for me. He is hunting you." Cal's distinction was important. His wolf is taking over. He is not sleeping, barely eating. He has not been fully human in over a week. The pack is restless. They can feel the king's instability through the bonds. Some of the younger alphas are starting to make noise about a leadership challenge. What about Serafina? The name tasted like poison on Cassandra's tongue. I thought he had everything he wanted. A dark, bitter laugh escaped Cal. That is the thing, Cass. Something is wrong with her. The pack doctor finally got access to Serafina's full medical records from her home pack. There are discrepancies. Big ones. What kind of discrepancies? The kind that suggest her pregnancy timeline does not match what she claimed. The kind that make the paternity questionable. Cal's voice dropped lower, like he was worried about being overheard. Thaddeus's wolf is rejecting her completely. He cannot stand to be in the same room with her. Whatever scent she was giving off that convinced him she was carrying his child, it is changing. Degrading. Cassandra's mind raced. Werewolf pregnancies were difficult to fake precisely because of scent markers. A female carrying a particular male's child would smell of him in ways that went beyond simple contact. The pheromones were distinct, unmistakable, coded at a level that conscious deception could not touch, unless someone had found a way to fake them. Cal, what are you saying? I am saying that the pack's cybersecurity team has been digging, quietly, without Thaddeus knowing because he is too far gone to think straight. Cal paused. Cass, they found something, but I need to verify it before I tell you. I need to be absolutely certain. How long? A week, maybe 2. I will call you the moment I know. Cal. Cassandra closed her eyes, fighting the surge of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her carefully constructed composure. Is he going to find me? Silence on the other end of the line. Then quietly, the trackers found fabric from your jacket near the Washington-Oregon border. They have a fragment of your scent, Cass. They are moving south. I do not know how much time you have, but it is not long. The call ended. Cassandra stood at the window with the dead phone in her hand and watched the fog consume the town below. 3 weeks. She had bought herself 3 weeks of anonymity, and now the net was closing in. She could run again. Catch a bus to California, maybe down to Mexico, where pack law did not reach. Keep running until she found somewhere the Western territories had no influence, no connections, no reach. But running required energy she no longer possessed. The wolf's bane was taking a toll that went beyond nausea and tremors. She was losing weight she could not afford to lose. Her reflexes were slowing. Her wolf was retreating deeper into their shared consciousness, growing weak from the constant poison. She could not run forever. That night, she made a decision. She would stay in Timber Cove for 1 more week. If the trackers got close, she would see them coming. The town was small enough that strangers stood out. She would have warning. And if Cal called with information that changed everything, she needed to be somewhere he could reach her. 1 more week. Then she would decide. The decision was made for her 6 days later. Cassandra was in the middle of the lunch rush carrying a tray loaded with fish and chips for a table of construction workers when the room tilted sideways. The fluorescent lights overhead suddenly seemed impossibly bright, searing into her retinas with painful intensity. The smell of frying grease, which she had grown accustomed to over 3 weeks, became overwhelmingly pungent. Her stomach lurched violently. The tray slipped from her hands. Dishes shattered on the floor in an explosion of ceramic and food. The room spun. Cassandra reached for the counter to steady herself, but her legs had turned to water. She heard someone shouting her name, felt hands catching her before she hit the ground. Then nothing. She woke in a hospital room so white it hurt to look at. The smell of antiseptic and illness made her stomach heave, but there was nothing left to vomit. An IV line ran into her left arm. A blood pressure cuff squeezed her right bicep at regular intervals. Through the window, she could see Timber Cove's main street and the ocean beyond gray and eternal. A doctor stood at the foot of her bed reading a chart. He was older, maybe 60, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a beard that had gone completely white. His name tag identified him as Dr. Patel. Well, Ms. Morgan, he looked up from the chart with a small smile. The good news is you are not dying. Your blood pressure dropped dangerously low, which caused the fainting spell, likely due to stress, malnutrition, and what appears to be chronic dehydration. Cassandra tried to sit up. The room swayed. I need to leave. I cannot afford this. Please lie still. Dr. Patel's voice was gentle but firm. We have you on fluids, and I need to discuss something important with you before you go anywhere. He moved to the chair beside her bed, settling into it with the ease of someone who had delivered difficult news many times before. Ms. Morgan, when was your last menstrual period? The question came from nowhere. Cassandra blinked at him, trying to process through the fog in her head. I do not remember. 2 months, maybe longer. I have been under a lot of stress. It affects my cycle. That would be consistent with what we found. Dr. Patel pulled the chart closer, reading from it. Your blood work shows significantly elevated levels of human chorionic gonadotropin, HCG. Do you know what that is? She knew. Every werewolf female knew. HCG was the hormone that pregnancy tests detected, the biological marker that confirmed conception. No, Cassandra whispered. That is impossible. My husband and I tried for 5 years. I'm infertile. I do not know what to tell you, Ms. Morgan, but the blood test does not lie. Dr. Patel's smile was genuinely pleased, like he was delivering good news. You are approximately 8 weeks pregnant. Based on your HCG levels, I would estimate conception occurred sometime in early September. Have you told the father? The world stopped. 8 weeks, early September. 1 week before Serafina had walked through the pack house doors with her swollen belly and her lies. 1 week before Thaddeus had shattered Cassandra's world with his confession of betrayal. The last time they had made love. The morning before everything fell apart. When he had pulled her close and whispered promises about time and patience and figuring things out together. A baby, Thaddeus's baby, after 5 years of negative tests and medical consultations and slowly dying hope. After she had fled into the wilderness and poisoned herself with wolf's bane and rebuilt her life as a waitress in a forgotten coastal town. She was carrying the true heir to the Western Territories. The irony was so sharp it felt like a physical wound. She wanted to laugh, she wanted to scream, she wanted to rage at the moon goddess who had held this blessing back for 5 years and then delivered it at the worst possible moment in the worst possible circumstances. Ms. Morgan or doctor. Patel's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Are you all right? The father. Cassandra's voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from very far away. The father is out of the picture. It is just me. I see. The doctor's expression shifted to something more concerned. Have you been taking any medications or supplements? Your blood work shows some irregularities that concern me. Your liver enzymes are elevated and your white blood cell count is abnormal, the wolf's bane. The poison she had been drinking every morning for 3 weeks, flooding her system with toxins designed to suppress werewolf scent and traits. Poisoning herself to stay hidden. Poisoning her baby. Cassandra could not form words, could not breathe. The walls were closing in. I am going to prescribe prenatal vitamins and recommend you see an OBGYN as soon as possible. Dr. Patel stood making notes on his chart. Your blood pressure is dangerously low. You need to reduce stress, eat regular meals, and get adequate rest. Pregnancy is hard enough without adding malnutrition and exhaustion to the mix. How long, she managed to ask. How long can I continue? My current lifestyle. Dr. Patel gave her a look that suggested he knew exactly what kind of lifestyle she meant. Ms. Morgan, whatever you are running from, whatever situation you are in, you need to think about more than just yourself now. That baby inside you deserves the best chance at life, and that means you need to take care of yourself. Is that understood? She nodded mutely. They released her 4 hours later with a prescription she could not fill because she had no insurance and a referral to an OBGYN she would never see. Cassandra walked back to her studio apartment through the perpetual coastal fog and sat on her Murphy bed staring at nothing. A baby. Her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. Flat. Empty. But not anymore. Deep inside, cells were dividing and growing and forming something that would become a person. Half her, half Thaddeus. The child they had tried so desperately to create for 5 years finally manifesting at the worst possible moment. If Thaddeus knew, he would tear the world apart to bring her back. Not because he loved her, though some part of him still did. Not because he wanted to make amends, though guilt clearly drove some of his feral searching. He would hunt her because she carried his heir. The legitimate, true-blooded heir that Serafina's child could never be, no matter what documents Elder Wren had forged. She would be locked in a gilded cage forever, an incubator for his precious legacy. Her value reduced to the child in her womb. Cassandra looked at the 4 remaining jars of wolf's bane sitting on her kitchen counter. The poison that had kept her hidden but was now killing her baby. Dr. Patel's words echoed in her mind. Elevated liver enzymes, abnormal blood cell count, dangerously low blood pressure. She was carrying the next alpha of the Western Territories, and she was poisoning him with every cup of tea she drank. The choice was impossible. Continue the wolf's bane and stay hidden while slowly killing her child, or stop the poison, allow her natural werewolf scent to return, and light a beacon that would guide Thaddeus's trackers straight to her door. Cassandra stood and walked to the sink. She picked up the first jar of wolf's bane. The dried purple flowers rattled against the glass. Her hands shook as she unscrewed the lid. She poured it down the drain. One by one, she emptied all 4 jars, watching the toxic flowers swirl away into the darkness of the pipes. When the last jar was empty, she stood at the sink and cried. For the child she was choosing to protect. For the freedom she was choosing to sacrifice. For the future that was now inevitable. Within 3 days, her natural scent would return. Within a week, any tracker within 100 miles would smell her. Within 2 weeks at most, Thaddeus would find her. But her baby would have a chance. The withdrawal was worse than anything she had experienced. For 72 hours, Cassandra lay on the bathroom floor of her studio apartment, sweating out the poison as her werewolf metabolism forcefully rejected the accumulated toxins. Her temperature spiked to 103 degrees. She hallucinated seeing Thaddeus in the corner of the room, watching her with those steel gray eyes. Denise from the diner found her on day 2 after Cassandra had missed 2 shifts without calling. The older woman took one look at her, shaking on the floor, and called Dr. Patel, who made a house call that he absolutely should not have made and asked no questions that Cassandra could not answer. Flu too, he told Denise, though his eyes said he knew better. She needs fluids and rest. I will check on her tomorrow. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Cassandra woke on her bathroom floor with sunlight streaming through the small window and felt something impossible. Her baby moved. It was barely there, a flutter like butterfly wings against the inside of her abdomen, so faint she might have imagined it. But her wolf stirred for the first time in weeks, rising from the depths where she had retreated, and sang with recognition. Pup. Our pup. Cassandra placed her hand on her stomach and felt it again. That tiny flutter, that whisper of life. And with the poison finally purged from her system, her werewolf senses came roaring back. She could smell herself again, the complex markers that identified her as what she truly was. Wildflowers and rain and pine. The distinct, potent aroma of a royal Luna. And underneath it, woven through her own scent like gold thread through fabric, the scent of the child she carried. Already distinct. Already his own person. She had lit the beacon. And now all she could do was wait. The call came 2 weeks later. Cassandra was sitting on the front steps of the hardware store, watching the fishing boats come in, with the afternoon tide when the burner phone buzzed in her pocket. Cal. She answered before the first ring finished. It is over, Cal said without preamble. His voice was shaking with an emotion Cassandra could not quite identify. Cass, it is all over. The pack is in ruins. And Thaddeus has completely snapped. What happened? We found the truth about Serafina. Cal sounded like he had not slept in days. The cyber team hacked the private servers at Oregon Health and Science University in Portland. We found her real medical files. Cass, everything was forged. The ultrasound images she showed Thaddeus were digitally altered. The DNA markers, claiming Blackwood paternity, were fabricated. She was pregnant, yes, but not by Thaddeus. Cassandra's hand tightened on the phone. Then who? A rogue alpha named Kieran Stone. She had been sleeping with him for months. The entire thing was a setup. Cal's voice turned bitter. Elder Wren funded it, all of it. He paid a doctor at the fertility clinic $280,000 to create false records. He wanted you gone, Cass. He wanted a Luna he could control. And he found one in Serafina. The magnitude of the betrayal made Cassandra's breath catch. It had all been a lie. Every moment of that terrible confrontation in Thaddeus' study, every word Serafina had spoken, every claim about carrying the next alpha. All of it orchestrated by an old man who believed Cassandra's bloodline was too weak to produce worthy heirs. Does Thaddeus know? He knows. Cal's voice went dark. When the evidence came to light, he confronted Wren in front of the full council. The old bastard confessed everything. Said it was for the good of the pack. That you were barren and would never produce an heir. That Serafina was young and fertile and properly connected. What did Thaddeus do? He challenged Wren to ritual combat, right there in the council chambers in front of everyone. It lasted less than 2 minutes. Thaddeus snapped his neck and threw the body at the council's feet. Cal paused. Then he went after Serafina. Cassandra could picture it. The rage, the betrayal, the feral king who had lost everything to a conspiracy. He stripped her naked in front of the entire pack. Took her title, her rank, everything. Then he exiled her to the no man's land between territories. The rogue lands, where Kieran is probably still waiting for her. Cal laughed, but there was no humor in it. She walked out of the pack house with nothing but the clothes the Omegas gave her out of pity. And Thaddeus? His wolf has taken over completely, Cass. He destroyed the West Wing with his bare hands. Just tore it apart. The council is terrified. The pack is on edge. Some of the Gammas are talking about restraining him for his own safety, but no one wants to try. Cal, Cassandra's voice came out as a whisper. Why are you telling me this? Because he is not sending trackers anymore. The words dropped like stones. He called them all back 3 days ago, said if anyone was going to find you, it would be him. And Cass, without the wolf's bane suppressing your scent. He caught it on the wind. He knows you are in Oregon, somewhere on the coast. Her blood turned to ice. How close is he? He left the pack house yesterday morning. He is already in Northern California moving up the coast. Cass, he is not thinking straight. His wolf is feral with grief and guilt. He knows he threw away his true mate for a lie. He knows what he did to you, and it is killing him. Cassandra stood looking out at the Pacific Ocean that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. No more running, no more hiding. The truth was coming for her on 4 legs, empowered by rage and regret. How long do I have? 2 days, maybe 3 if he stops to rest, but I do not think he will. Cal's voice softened. Cass, if you need me to come to you, if you need help, just say the word. I will be there. No. She touched her stomach, feeling the slight swell that had begun to show. This is between him and me. It always was. Cass, wait. There is something else you should know. Cal hesitated, then pushed forward. The mate bond. When you left, it nearly destroyed him. I have never seen anything like it. He can feel you out there, can sense that you are alive but suffering. It is driving him insane. Whatever happens when he finds you, remember that he is not completely rational right now. His wolf is in control. The call ended. Cassandra stood on the steps of Frank Dalton's hardware store and felt the mate bond flare in her chest for the first time since she had fled. That golden tether that connected her to Thaddeus Blackwood, dormant and aching for months, suddenly burned with the intensity of a dying star. He was close, and getting closer with every hour. She went back to her studio apartment and began to prepare. Not to run, not to hide, but to face the confrontation that had been inevitable from the moment she fled into the storm. She was carrying his child, the true heir he had destroyed their bond trying to obtain. And when he discovered that truth, everything would change. Cassandra packed a bag, not with clothes for escape, but with supplies for what came next. She was 7 months pregnant now, her belly round and firm beneath her waitress uniform. Her wolf was strong again, fierce and protective, in a way that had nothing to do with pack politics and everything to do with the life growing inside her. She had one more decision to make. Stay in Timber Cove and let him find her in this shabby studio above a hardware store. Or choose her ground. Choose the place where the next chapter of this story would be written. The answer came with surprising clarity. Cassandra gave Denise 2 weeks' notice that she had no intention of working. She paid Frank Dalton for the final month's rent in cash. She loaded her few possessions into the beat-up Honda CR-V she had purchased from a fisherman for $3,000, and she drove south, into the redwoods, into the ancient forests of Northern California, where trees older than nations reached toward the sky, where fog moved like living ghosts between trunks wide enough to drive cars through, where a woman could find a cabin at the end of a dirt road so far off the grid that electricity was a luxury and running water came from a well. She found it outside a town called Ironwood, population 600, a cabin that rented for $1,400 a month with 6 months required up front. No questions asked, no paperwork filed, just cash and a handshake and a warning that the nearest neighbor was 4 miles away through forests that would kill the unprepared. It was perfect. Cassandra moved into the cabin and began to nest. Her wolf drove her with instincts older than civilization. She chopped firewood until her hands blistered. She stocked the pantry with canned goods and dried meat. She built a crib from salvaged lumber, her hands moving with certainty despite never having done carpentry before. And every night she sat on the porch and felt the mate bond burning brighter, closer, coming for her like a storm that could not be stopped. The burner phone rang one final time 3 weeks after she had settled into the cabin. Cal's voice was tight with urgency. He is in California. The trackers reported seeing him near the Humboldt County line. He is maybe 10 miles from the coast moving inland, toward the redwoods. I know. Cassandra placed her hand on her stomach, feeling Ronan kick strongly. She had started calling the baby Ronan in her mind, Ronan Blackwood. The child who would never know the pack that should have been his birthright. I can feel him, Cal. He is close. Cass, what are you going to do? She looked out at the forest, at the ancient trees that had stood for thousands of years and would stand for thousands more, at the fog that rolled through them like the breath of the earth itself. "I am going to let him find me," she said quietly. "And then we are going to finish this." The storm came 3 days later. Cassandra had been tracking its approach across the Pacific for 72 hours, watching satellite images on the ancient laptop she had bought from a pawn shop in Ironwood. A massive atmospheric river, meteorologists called it. A corridor of moisture stretching from Hawaii to the California coast, carrying enough water to turn the redwood forest into an impassable maze of mud and flooding creeks. Wind gusts predicted at 80 miles per hour. Rainfall measured in feet, not inches. The kind of storm that happened once a decade and reminded humans why the old gods were worth fearing. It was also the kind of storm that would mask an alpha's approach until he was right on top of you. The cabin sat in a clearing carved from ancient forests surrounded by coastal redwoods that had stood since before Columbus sailed. The trees were massive beyond comprehension, their trunks 40 feet in diameter, their crowns disappearing into perpetual fog 300 feet overhead. The forest floor was a carpet of ferns and fallen needles, eerily silent, in the way that old-growth wilderness always was. No underbrush, no small animals scurrying, just the cathedral hush of a place that had learned patience over millennia. Cassandra stood on the porch as the first drops began to fall, one hand resting on her swollen belly. 8 months pregnant now. Ronan was active, kicking and turning with the restless energy of a child who would be born alpha. She could feel his strength through the bond they shared, could sense his wolf already forming in the way that royal bloodlines sometimes manifested early. The mate bond in her chest had become a living flame over the past week. No longer the dull ache of distance and betrayal. Now it burned with proximity and urgency, pulling her north towards something that approached with single-minded determination. She did not need Cal's warning calls anymore. She could feel Thaddeus getting closer with every hour that passed. He was perhaps 5 miles away now, maybe less. Moving through the forest in his wolf form because 4 legs covered ground faster than 2, and his human mind had long since surrendered control to the feral creature that had been hunting her for months. The rain intensified. Within minutes, it became a solid wall of water, turning the clearing into a gray void where visibility dropped to mere feet. Thunder rolled through the mountains deep enough to shake the cabin's foundations. Lightning crackled somewhere in the distance, illuminating the forest in brief frozen snapshots. Perfect cover for a king who had finally found his queen. Cassandra went inside and locked the door. Not because a lock would stop him. The door was solid oak reinforced with iron hinges, but Thaddeus could tear through it like paper if he wanted. She locked it because ritual mattered. Because crossing a threshold uninvited carried meaning in werewolf culture. Because even now, even after everything, she needed him to choose to break down that barrier. She needed to know he would destroy everything to reach her. The cabin was warm despite the storm. She had built a fire in the river rock fireplace, fed it with split pine until flames danced 6 feet high. The interior was small but carefully arranged. A main room that served as kitchen, living area, and dining space. A bedroom barely large enough for the double bed and the crib she had built. A bathroom with a clawfoot tub and plumbing that groaned but functioned. Everything she needed, nothing she did not. She had prepared for this moment with the same meticulous attention she had once given to pack administration. Towels stacked beside the fireplace. Water boiling on the wood stove. Her hunting knife silver-edged and sharp enough to split hairs lying on the kitchen table within easy reach. Medical supplies in the bathroom. Candles lit throughout the cabin because the storm would take the power soon. And in the center of the room she stood, waiting. The scent hit first. It crept through the grass around the door and the spaces where the cabin's logs did not quite meet. Pine and petrichor and something darker. The smell of a predator who had been running for days without rest. The smell of a male who had lost everything and was operating on instinct alone. It was Thaddeus's scent, but wrong, feral, unhinged, dangerous in ways that the controlled alpha king had never been. Cassandra's wolf rose to the surface, hackles raised, ready to defend their pup against any threat. Even one that wore the face of their mate. The footsteps came next, heavy tread on the porch steps. The creak of wood under significant weight. A pause at the door so long that Cassandra wondered if he had changed his mind. If some part of his human consciousness had fought back to the surface and told him this was wrong, this was madness, this was not how an alpha king behaved. Then the door exploded inward. Not opened, not unlocked. Exploded. The oak shattered off its hinges with a crack louder than the thunder, pieces of wood and twisted metal flying across the room. The storm howled through the opening, bringing sheets of rain and wind that made the candle flames dance wildly. And in the doorway framed by lightning and darkness, in the raw fury of the Pacific storm, stood Thaddeus Blackwood. He looked nothing like the polished alpha king who had dismissed her in his mahogany study 4 months ago. That man had been groomed and controlled, every hair in place, every gesture calculated for political effect. The creature standing in her doorway was something else entirely. His clothes hung in tatters shredded by weeks of shifting between forms without bothering to undress first. His dark hair was long and wild, matted with mud and pine needles. A thick beard covered his jaw, unkempt and tangled. His feet were bare despite the freezing rain, covered in cuts and scars from running over rocks and roots. But it was his eyes that stole the breath from Cassandra's lungs. Completely gold. No trace of the steel gray she remembered. His wolf was in total control, staring out through human eyes with an intensity that bordered on madness. He stood there, chest heaving, rain pouring off him to pool on the cabin floor, and just looked at her. His gaze locked on her face for one endless moment. Then slowly, inevitably, his eyes dropped. To her belly. To the unmistakable swell of 8 months' pregnancy that no amount of loose clothing could hide. To the physical proof that she carried his child. The sound that came out of Thaddeus was not human. It was a roar of anguish, so primal, so broken, that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. He staggered forward 2 steps and then dropped to his knees with a crash that cracked the hardwood floorboards. His hands came up to cover his face, and through his fingers came sobs that racked his entire body. The great alpha king of the Western Territories knelt on her cabin floor in a puddle of muddy water and wept like a child. "I didn't know." The words came out between gasping breaths, barely intelligible. "Goddess Cass, I didn't know, I didn't know." Cassandra stood frozen, one hand still resting protectively on her stomach. Her wolf was snarling, demanding she shift and tear out his throat for the betrayal. But the human part of her, the part that had loved him for 5 years, with everything she possessed, could only stare at the ruins of the man she had fled. "You didn't need to know about the baby Thaddeus." Her voice came out colder than the storm outside, controlled, each word precisely chosen. "You only needed to know that I was your mate, that I stood beside you for 5 years, that I built your kingdom while you destroyed our bond for a politically convenient lie." He crawled forward on his hands and knees, not even attempting to stand. The Alpha King reduced to crawling across the floor of a rundown cabin, stopping inches from her feet. He looked up at her with those feral gold eyes, and tears carved tracks through the grime on his face. "I was a fool." His voice was raw, shredded by weeks of howling into the wilderness. "A blind, arrogant fool. I let the pressure of the crown poison my mind. I let Ren manipulate me. I let Serafina play me like a puppet. And I threw away the only thing that ever mattered." "Yes, you did." Cassandra felt no satisfaction in the admission. Only the hollow ache of vindication that came too late to change anything. "They're gone, Cass. All of them. Ren is dead. I executed him in front of the entire council." Ripping out his throat and left his body for the crows. Thaddeus's hands shook as he reached toward her stomach, stopping just millimeters away from touching, terrified to make contact without permission. "Serafina is exiled, stripped of everything, wandering the rogue lands with nothing but shame and the bastard she tried to pass off as mine." "I know, Cal told me." "But the rot wasn't just in them." He pressed his forehead to the floor in a gesture of complete submission. "The rot was in me, in my judgment, in my willingness to sacrifice the most precious thing I possessed for the sake of political stability. That rot is still there, Cass, eating me alive. I haven't slept more than an hour at a time in 4 months. I haven't shifted back fully in weeks. My wolf knows what I did, and he's trying to kill me for it." Cassandra looked down at the broken king kneeling at her feet. Part of her wanted to feel triumph, wanted to revel in his suffering the way he had made her suffer. But mostly she just felt tired. Tired of running, tired of poisoning herself with wolf's bane, tired of the mate bond that pulled at her, constantly demanding reconciliation even as her conscious mind screamed betrayal. "Please." Thaddeus's voice cracked completely. "Please tell me that's my child. Tell me that after everything I destroyed, the moon goddess at least gave us this." Cassandra placed both hands on her belly, feeling Ronan kick strongly in response to his father's voice. "He is yours, but he's mine first. You don't get to claim him just because your fake heir failed you. I don't want to claim him to replace anything." Thaddeus finally looked up, and the raw desperation in his eyes was almost unbearable to witness. "I want to spend the rest of my miserable life proving that I'm worthy of the dirt you walk on. I want to earn the privilege of knowing him, of knowing you. I will strip myself of the title. I will give the crown to Cal. I don't care about the kingdom anymore, Cass." He reached up slowly, telegraphing every movement, and bared his throat. the ultimate gesture of submission from an alpha, offering his life into her hands. I only care about my queen. Before Cassandra could respond, before she could process the enormity of what he was offering, a blinding pain ripped through her abdomen. She gasped, doubling over her hands, clutching her stomach as a contraction seized her entire body. It felt like being torn in half from the inside, like every muscle from her ribs to her pelvis had decided to contract simultaneously. The pain was so intense that her vision blurred at the edges, the cabin swimming in and out of focus. Cass! Thaddeus was on his feet instantly, his alpha reflexes overriding everything else. His hands caught her before she fell, supporting her weight with easy strength despite his emaciated appearance. "Don't touch me!" The words came out as a scream as another contraction hit barely 30 seconds after the first. This was wrong. Labor was supposed to build slowly, contractions minutes apart in the beginning. Not this immediate, overwhelming assault. But Ronan had other plans. The stress of the confrontation, the shock of Thaddeus's appearance, the overwhelming surge of the mate bond flaring back to life after months of suppression. It had triggered early labor, and there was no hospital within 50 miles. Warm fluid gushed down Cassandra's legs, soaking through her jeans. Her water had broken. There was no stopping this now. "Cass, I have to help you." Thaddeus's voice had changed completely. The feral madness was gone, replaced by the calm authority she remembered from before everything fell apart. The Alpha King taking command of a crisis. "I know you hate me. I know I deserve every bit of that hatred. But right now, I'm the only one here. And our son is coming, whether we're ready or not." Another contraction drove her to her knees. Cassandra screamed through it, her wolf howling in her mind with pain and fear and primal rage. When it passed, leaving her gasping and shaking, she found herself in Thaddeus's arms. He had scooped her up effortlessly despite his weakened state, cradling her against his chest as he carried her to the bedroom. His scent surrounded her, pine and petrichor, mixed with the musk of a male in protective mode. The mate bond surged between them, suddenly alive and vital, in a way it had not been since the night of the betrayal. "I hate you," she sobbed as he laid her on the bed. "I hate you so much." "I know." He was already moving, stripping the ruined jeans from her legs, covering her with blankets. "You can hate me for the rest of our lives, Cass. Just let me help you bring our son into the world. That's all I'm asking. Just this." The next 6 hours dissolved into a hell of pain and exhaustion that made everything else seem insignificant. Cassandra had thought she understood suffering. She had endured 5 years of fertility struggles and monthly disappointments. She had survived the betrayal and the flight through the storm. She had poisoned herself with wolf's bane and rebuilt her life from nothing. None of it compared to labor. The contractions came in waves that crashed over her with no mercy, no pause, no respite. Her body was trying to tear itself apart to bring Ronan into the world, and there was nothing she could do but endure. She screamed until her voice gave out. She gripped the sheets until they tore. She cursed Thaddeus and the moon goddess and the entire werewolf race for making reproduction this agonizing. And through it all, Thaddeus stayed. He knelt beside the bed, one hand gripping hers hard enough to leave bruises, the other checking her progress with a clinical efficiency that suggested he had delivered babies before. His voice never wavered as he coached her through each contraction, telling her when to push and when to breathe and when to rest. He wiped sweat from her forehead with a cool cloth. He supported her back when she needed to sit up. He poured his strength into her through the mate bond, that golden tether that connected them, flowing with power for the first time in months. "You're doing so well, Cass," he murmured during a brief respite between contractions. "Our son is almost here. Just a little longer." "I can't." She was crying openly now, tears mixing with sweat. "I can't do this anymore. It hurts too much." "Yes, you can." His eyes slowly fading from gold back to steel gray as his human consciousness reasserted control, held hers with absolute conviction. "You're the strongest person I've ever known. You survived me. You survived everything I put you through. You can survive this." At 3:47 in the morning, as the storm finally began to break and the first hints of dawn touched the eastern sky, Ronan Thorne Blackwood came into the world. The sound of his first cry was the most beautiful thing Cassandra had ever heard. A sharp, indignant wail that announced his arrival and his displeasure at being forced out of his comfortable womb into the cold reality of existence. Thaddeus caught him, his large hands impossibly gentle, as he lifted the tiny squalling bundle. He was perfect. Red-faced and wrinkled and covered in vernix, but perfect. Dark hair plastered to his skull. Eyes that would eventually be gray like his father's, but were currently the deep blue of all newborns. tiny fists waving with impotent rage. Already strong, already determined, already every inch an alpha. Thaddeus wrapped him in a clean towel, his hands shaking, tears streaming openly down his face. He placed Ronan on Cassandra's chest with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. "Our son," he whispered. "Cass, our son." She looked down at the tiny life that had fought so hard to be born and felt something crack in the ice that had formed around her heart over the past 4 months. This was real. This was hers. This perfect, impossible child who had survived Wolf's Bane poisoning and stress and early labor and the complete collapse of his parents' relationship. "Ronan," she said softly, tracing one finger down his tiny cheek. "His name is Ronan because he survived all of this, because he's our miracle." Thaddeus pressed his forehead to hers, careful not to disturb the baby between them. His tears fell onto her face, mixing with her own. "I will never stop groveling, Cass. For 100 years I will make this right. You dictate the terms. You rule the pack. I'm just your soldier now, your servant, whatever you need me to be." She looked at him through exhausted, tear-blurred eyes, the man who had broken her heart, the father of her child, the mate her soul still recognized despite everything he had done. The road to forgiveness stretched ahead of them, longer than the miles she had run, harder than the labor she had just endured. "We have a lot of work to do, Thaddeus," she whispered, pulling Ronan closer. "Start by making me some tea." For the first time in 4 months, she saw him smile. It was tentative and broken and shadowed by guilt, but it was real. He stood, kissed her forehead with infinite gentleness, and moved to the kitchen to boil water. The next 4 weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and painful recovery, and slowly, tentatively learning to exist in the same space again. Thaddeus stayed. Cassandra had expected him to leave once the immediate crisis passed, to return to his pack and his throne, and leave her to raise Ronan in peace. But he made no move toward departure. Instead, he became her servant. He cooked every meal, simple food that he prepared, with more care than she had ever seen him give anything. He changed diapers with a dedication that would have been funny if it had not been so earnest. He walked the floor with Ronan during the long nights when the baby fussed and would not settle. He cleaned the cabin, chopped firewood, maintained the generator, did everything that needed doing without being asked. And he never, not once, tried to touch her beyond what was necessary. They existed in a strange limbo. Not mates, not strangers. Something undefined and fragile that could shatter with one wrong word. Cassandra watched him with Ronan and felt the ice continue to crack. The way he cradled their son like something infinitely precious. The way he sang old werewolf lullabies in a voice gone hoarse from disuse. The way his entire face transformed when Ronan wrapped a tiny fist around his finger. This was the Thaddeus she had fallen in love with at 19. Before the crown had twisted power at him. Before Elder Wren had poisoned his judgment. Before Seraphina had exploited his weakness. On the 3rd week Callahan arrived. Cassandra heard the truck before she saw it, an engine growling up the dirt road that was barely more than a trail. She looked out the window to see Cal climbing out of a mud-covered pickup, a duffel bag over one shoulder, and relief written across his features. "Permission to enter," he called from the porch, respecting the boundaries of her chosen territory. "Granted." Cassandra opened the door and Cal swept her into a hug, gentle enough to account for her still healing body. "Goddess Cass, I was so worried." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes cataloging the changes 4 months had wrought. Then his gaze dropped to Ronan sleeping in a basket by the fire. "Is that him?" "That's Ronan." Cal knelt beside the basket with the reverence of an uncle meeting his nephew for the first time. "He's beautiful. He has your chin. And Thad's unfortunate nose." He looked up with a grin that faded when he saw Thaddeus emerge from the bedroom. The two men stared at each other. Alpha and Beta, king and second, brothers in everything but blood. Thaddeus looked like he wanted to say something, but the words would not come. Cal saved him the trouble. "You look like hell, Thad." "I've earned it." Cal stood, moving to stand between Cassandra and Thaddeus in a gesture that was purely protective. "I came to check on Cass, to make sure she has everything she needs, and to deliver a message from the council." "The council can go to hell, fine," Thaddeus said flatly. "That's basically what they said about you." Cal pulled a folded document from his jacket. "Official notice. They're invoking the absence clause. You've been gone for 4 months without formal communication or delegation of authority. They're calling for a vote on interim leadership." Cassandra watched Thaddeus's face, expecting anger or desperation. Instead, she saw only calm acceptance. "Good, let them vote. I formally abdicate. The crown goes to whoever the council deems fit. I'm done." "Thad," Cal's voice held warning. "You don't mean that. The pack is your life. The pack is my responsibility. There's a difference. Thaddeus looked at Cassandra, his eyes holding hers with painful honesty. I chose politics over my mate once. I won't make that mistake again. If staying king means leaving them, I choose them. Every time. Forever. Silence filled the cabin. Even Ronan seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, remaining peacefully asleep despite the tension. Actually, Cassandra heard herself say, "You're not abdicating, you're being demoted." Both men turned to stare at her. She stood moving to take the document from Cal's hands, scanning the legal language. Then she looked at Thaddeus with a calm that belied the chaos of her thoughts. "We're going back to the Western Territories, all three of us, but not as Alpha King and Luna. We're going back as Queen and King Consort." Thaddeus's eyes widened. "Cass, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." She cut him off, her voice harder than she intended. "That pack is as much mine as it is yours. I built systems and forged alliances and held things together for 5 years while you played politics. And then I was cast aside because I couldn't produce an heir fast enough. Well, I did produce an heir, the legitimate, true-blooded heir that Seraphina's bastard never could have been." She moved closer to him, Ronan in her arms, and Thaddeus instinctively stepped back. "Here are my terms, Thaddeus Blackwood. We return as a family. You publicly abdicate the title of Alpha King. I take the throne as ruling queen. You become my consort and advisor, but you serve at my pleasure. The pack answers to me. The council answers to me. And if you ever lie to me or betray me or put politics above our bond again, I will take our son and disappear so thoroughly that even the moon goddess won't be able to find us." She let the words hang in the air, watching him process what she was offering. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a chance. A path forward that acknowledged what he had destroyed while building something new from the ashes. "Do you accept my terms?" Thaddeus dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the cabin and bared his throat. "I accept. On my life, on my honor, on everything I am or ever will be. You are my queen, and I am your servant." Cal looked between them, a slow smile spreading across his face. "The council is going to lose their minds." "Good," Cassandra said coldly. "They've earned it." The journey back to Montana took 3 days. They traveled in Cal's truck, Ronan secured in a car seat that Cal had bought specifically for the trip. Cassandra sat in the back with the baby while Thaddeus rode in front, staring out the window at the landscape he had crossed on foot in his mad search. They stopped at a hotel in Boise so Cassandra could rest and Ronan could have a proper bath. That night, while the baby slept in a portable crib and Cal kept watch in the adjoining room, Thaddeus sat on the edge of the bed and finally spoke the words that had been building for 4 months. "I know saying sorry means nothing. I know it doesn't undo what I did or fix what I broke, but I need you to know that I understand exactly how badly I failed you." His hands twisted together, a nervous gesture she had not seen since their early days together. "Ren spent years telling me that your bloodline was weak, that you were too young when we mated, that a true Alpha King needed a Luna of proper breeding to produce strong heirs. I thought I was immune to it. I thought our bond was stronger than politics. But it wasn't." Cassandra kept her voice neutral, stating fact rather than accusation. "No, when the ultimatum came, when the council threatened a vote of no confidence, I panicked. Ren brought Seraphina to the summer summit and made sure we were alone. She was beautiful and available and supposedly fertile, and I was weak enough to fall for it." He looked at her, and the self-loathing in his eyes was almost painful to witness. "One night, that's all it took to destroy 5 years of trust." "Did you love her?" The question had haunted Cassandra for months. "No, I barely knew her. It was purely physical. The worst kind of betrayal because it meant nothing." He ran his hands through his hair, now trimmed but still wild. "When she showed up pregnant, Ren had the DNA evidence ready. The ultrasounds, everything perfectly forged. And I wanted so desperately to believe that I had secured the succession that I didn't question any of it. You chose convenience over truth. I chose politics over you, and I will regret it until the day I die." Awesome. Thaddeus slid off the bed, kneeling on the hotel floor in the same position of submission he had assumed in the cabin. "I won't ask for forgiveness, Cass. I haven't earned it, but I swear on Ronan's life that I will spend every remaining day proving that I can be better, that I can be worthy of the mercy you're showing me." Cassandra looked at him kneeling there, the Alpha King reduced to a penitent, and felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet. But maybe the beginning of something that could eventually become forgiveness given enough time and proof. "Get up, Thaddeus. We have a long drive tomorrow." He stood, and for a moment they stared at each other across the space of the hotel room. Then tentatively he reached out one hand. She looked at it for a long moment before placing her hand in his. The mate bond flared between them, warm and golden and damaged but not destroyed. "We're going to rebuild," she said quietly. "Everything. The bond, the pack, the kingdom. But we're doing it my way, on my terms. Do you understand?" "Yes, my queen." They arrived at the Western Territories pack house on a cold November afternoon. The massive log and stone structure looked exactly as Cassandra remembered, perched on the mountainside like a fortress that had stood for generations. But as Cal's truck pulled up the long driveway, she could see the changes. The west wing was indeed destroyed, nothing but rubble and charred timbers. The gardens she had built were overgrown and dying from neglect. Windows were dark that should have been lit with activity. The entire place had the air of something wounded and struggling to survive. The pack had felt their king's madness, and it had nearly destroyed them. Word of their arrival had preceded them. When the truck stopped at the main entrance, 300 pack members stood assembled on the grand steps. Not the full 600. Many had fled to satellite territories or requested transfers to allied packs. The Council of Elders stood at the front, 12 men and women who looked like they had aged a decade in 4 months. Cassandra stepped out of the truck, carrying Ronan, and the assembled pack dropped to their knees. Not for Thaddeus, who emerged from the passenger side looking like a shadow of his former self. For her. For the Luna, who had been cast aside and had returned carrying the legitimate heir. Acting council head, Lydia Frost stepped forward, her face a mask of careful neutrality. "Luna Cassandra, we welcome you home. We owe you—" "I'm not Luna Cassandra anymore." Cassandra's voice cut through the November air with authority that made several pack members flinch. "I am Queen Cassandra Blackwood, and you will address me as such, or you will address nothing at all." Shocked silence. Lydia's eyes widened. Behind her, the council members exchanged panicked glances. Thaddeus moved to stand 3 steps behind Cassandra, his head bowed in a gesture everyone recognized. Submission. The Alpha King was submitting to his mate in front of the entire pack. "By right of true mate bond, by divine decree of the moon goddess, and by the fact that I carried this pack's legitimate heir, while you conspired to replace me, I claim the throne of the Western Territories." Cassandra shifted Ronan in her arms, and the baby chose that perfect moment to let out a strong, healthy cry that echoed across the assembled pack. "Thaddeus Blackwood hereby abdicates his title as Alpha King. He will serve as my king consort and advisor. But all authority flows through me." She let her gaze sweep across the kneeling pack members, meeting eyes and daring anyone to challenge her. "This pack allowed politics to destroy your true queen. You enabled a conspiracy that nearly killed your crown prince. You stood silent while Elder Wren and Seraphina Vale orchestrated a betrayal that threatened the very foundation of our kingdom." Her voice rose, carrying over the mountains and forests. "That ends now, today, this moment." She turned to the council. "Those of you who voted to replace me with Seraphina Vale stand." 8 of the 12 council members slowly rose to their feet, their faces pale. "You are stripped of your council positions effective immediately. You will make public apologies to this pack, confessing your roles in the conspiracy, and you will serve 2 years of probation, during which you have no voice in pack governance. If you cannot accept these terms, you are free to leave the territory." One by one, the 8 former council members bowed their heads in acceptance. They had no choice. Challenging a queen backed by divine right and carrying the heir would be suicide. "Lydia Frost, you will serve as interim council head while I restructure pack governance. Callahan Rivers, you are promoted to head Gamma and my personal guard. Dr. Helena Monroe, you will continue as pack physician and will oversee Ronan's care." Cassandra looked at Thaddeus, who remained kneeling 3 steps behind her. "Thaddeus Blackwood, approach your queen." He moved forward on his knees, stopping at her feet. The ultimate gesture of submission, witnessed by 300 pack members and broadcast through the pack bonza to the hundreds more spread across the territories. "Do you swear fealty to me? Do you acknowledge me as ruling monarch of the Western Territories? Do you accept that you serve at my pleasure and by my mercy alone?" "I swear." His voice was steady, clear, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I serve at my queen's pleasure. I rule only by her mercy. My life, my loyalty, my everything belongs to her. Rise, consort." He stood and Cassandra handed him Ronan. The gesture was deliberate, public, showing the pack that Thaddeus had earned the privilege of holding his son, but that privilege came from her allowance. "We have a kingdom to rebuild," she said, addressing the pack. "And we will do it with justice, transparency, and respect for every member. The age of elder manipulation and political games is over. Welcome to the new reign." The pack howled their acceptance, the sound rolling across the mountains like thunder. Over the following 6 months, Cassandra rebuilt the Western Territories from the ground up. The old council structure was dismantled, completely replaced with an elected advisory board serving 4-year terms. She personally drafted a Luna Protection Act that made it illegal to remove a Luna for fertility issues requiring proof of treason or voluntary abdication. She instituted financial audits that uncovered Elder Wren's embezzlement of $1.4 million money she recovered and invested in PAC infrastructure. She ruled from a throne that had been elevated above Thaddeus's, a physical reminder of the new power structure. He sat beside her during PAC assemblies, offering advice when asked but never overstepping. True to his word, he served as her consort and nothing more. The PAC thrived under her leadership. Families who had fled returned. Allied PACs sought treaties. The hospital wing was expanded. The school system was modernized. Crime dropped by 67% in the first 3 months. Member satisfaction surveys showed 94% approval of Cassandra's reign. Serafina Vale's fate arrived via Cal's intelligence network 2 months after Cassandra's coronation, killed in a territorial dispute in the Alaskan Rogue Lands abandoned by Kieran Stone the moment his son was born. The child had been taken in by a neutral PAC. Cassandra felt no triumph at the news. Justice was cold comfort, and slowly, painfully, the mate bond began to heal. Thaddeus proved himself in 1,000 small ways. He never made a decision without consulting her first. He deferred to her judgment even when he disagreed. He spent hours with Ronan, teaching their son about PAC history and werewolf culture, making sure the boy knew his mother was the true power in their family. 6 months after their return on the spring equinox, Cassandra granted Thaddeus what he had been too afraid to ask for. She invited him back into her bed, not as king and Luna, not as equals, but as mates who were slowly, tentatively learning to trust again. As partners rebuilding something that had been shattered, but might with enough care become stronger for having been broken. The official ceremony came in June under a full moon that bathed the PAC house in silver light. Ronan's christening, the traditional werewolf ritual that would formally introduce the heir to the PAC and the moon goddess. 900 PAC members gathered in the central courtyard. The PAC shaman, an ancient woman named Elder Iris, who had served the Western Territories for 60 years, performed the ceremony. She anointed Ronan's forehead with sacred oil, drew the symbols of protection on his tiny chest, and lifted him toward the moon. "This child is born of true mates," Elder Iris proclaimed in a voice that carried despite her age. "Forged in fire, tempered by suffering, destined to lead with justice and compassion. The moon goddess has marked him for greatness." As if in response, Ronan's eyes flashed gold. Just for a moment. Just long enough for everyone to see. The sign of a powerful alpha bloodline. The sign of divine blessing. The PAC howled their acceptance, and the sound carried across the territories like a promise. That night on the balcony of the master suite that Cassandra had finally agreed to share with Thaddeus again, they stood together watching the moonlight paint the mountain silver. Ronan slept peacefully in his crib, surrounded by protections both magical and mundane. "Every day I prove I can be better," Thaddeus said quietly, his arms around her from behind. "Every single day." Cassandra leaned into him, allowing herself to take comfort in his presence for the first time since the betrayal. "Yes, you do. And that's what matters. I love you, Cass. I never stopped. Even when I was too blind and stupid to show it properly." She looked up at him, at the man who had broken her heart, and then spent 6 months proving he could be trusted with the pieces. "I know, and someday when I'm ready, I'll be able to say it back without feeling like I'm betraying myself." He kissed her forehead, accepting the limitation without complaint. "I can wait. I'll wait forever if that's what it takes." Behind them, through the open balcony doors, they heard Ronan stir in his sleep. Both parents turned instinctively, their wolves rising to protective attention. But the baby settled again, his tiny chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of innocent dreams. Cassandra thought about the journey that had brought them here. The betrayal and the flight. The poison and the pregnancy. The confrontation in a cabin during a storm. The long road back to something that resembled trust. She thought about the girl she had been at 19, so in love and so naive. About the woman she had become at 24, tempered by suffering into something harder and wiser. About the queen she was now ruling a kingdom that respected her, not because of who she had married, but because of what she had survived. "We're going to be okay," she said, more to herself than to Thaddeus. "All 3 of us. It's going to take time. It's going to be hard, but we're going to be okay." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, careful and gentle, giving her space to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. She leaned back into his warmth and let herself believe in possibilities again. Above them, the moon shone down on the Western territories, on a pack that had been broken and was slowly healing, on a kingdom ruled by a queen who had learned that true strength came not from never falling, but from choosing to rise, on a family built from ashes and spite and the stubborn refusal to let betrayal be the end of the story. The mistress had taken her place, so Cassandra had taken a throne, and in doing so she had reclaimed everything.